From renewable energy to Web3, Ryan Zurrer on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the NFT art revolution. In this episode, Dr. Jemma Green sits down with Ryan Zurrer, former renewable energy executive turned Web3 pioneer, who shares his journey from managing gigawatt-scale wind projects in Brazil to becoming a full-time crypto investor. Ryan reveals how discovering Bitcoin solved his personal remittance challenges, his strategic early investments in Ethereum, and how he's revolutionizing the art world through NFTs. They explore why top digital artists exclusively choose Ethereum for their work and how Ryan's one-of-one collection is helping digital artists take their rightful place in art canon. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl, and whether you're an investor or a startup looking for insights, it's time to get unblocked.
Welcome to Unblock'd, Ryan. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
We were preparing for this conversation and we saw you had a background in solar and wind energy. And obviously now you work in Web3 managing Dialectic and Vine. And we were interested to know, how did you traverse from that field into your current areas of work?
Yeah. So in the late 2000s and 2010s, I was running a fairly large renewables company in Brazil. We had about a gigawatt portfolio across wind and solar. Wind certainly captured zeitgeist and grew a lot from the 2008 to 2013 era and the fall of like Batista. But before that, Brazil was really a country on the up and up, especially with respect to renewables. And so I was lucky enough to be right place, right time. And
You were living there?
yeah, I was living there and building some of the early projects, but there was no expectation that the market would take off. And that was 2008. And within 3 years, it was the third largest annual installed base globally behind the US and China. And so it was a wonderful time to be there and working in renewables. And the wind regime there allowed us to really push new frontiers for height against shear factor. And so it was a wonderful time.
Amazing. And how did you make the transition from energy into Web3?
So living in Brazil, I became acutely aware of the cost of remittance. I was sending money home for a cottage in Canada that I've owned for a number of years. And the discovery of Bitcoin immediately clicked as a way to get around the draconian remittance in Brazil. So I took the proverbial trip down the rabbit hole in 2012, immediately seeing its use case for me as a consumer in Brazil that faced this very unfortunate problem. Cost for remittance robs a lot of wealth from a lot of people in the world. And then from there, the trajectory for people as they get into crypto often follows a similar pursuit, in that an increasing amount of time and capital is dedicated to crypto until you just realize that you have a completely irresponsible amount of your time and a completely irresponsible percentage of your capital tied up in crypto. And so in early 2015, I went to my board and told them that I would be moving on and focusing full-time in crypto. And at that time, Ethereum was this very pure, intellectually intriguing community that I wanted to just spend all my time in. If you would have asked me in 2012 if I ever would have left renewables, I'd say, no, this will be what I'll do the rest of my life. It's important. I'm good at it. I've had a lot of people put a lot into my training and I enjoyed it. Felt very meaningful. But, then you take the trip down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and everything changes overnight. And so the transition was a very clean cut. And when I went into crypto, I told myself, well, crypto is the space that's moving the fastest on the planet. And I know energy to be one of the slowest moving industries on the planet. And so these two, vehicles just are not compatible with each other, at least not in that cycle. And so I made the distinct decision to not do anything crossover crypto energy. But I think, now we're starting to see some really interesting use cases emerge in the crossover of crypto and energy.
Yeah, I think with DeFi and energy contracts and environmental commodities as well, that the intersection there is more obvious to move at a scale than with traditional energy, which, as you say, is kind of moves at a glacial speed.
Yeah. Certainly you can see that for compatibility or crossover of energy credits across different markets. Tokenization is the eventual solution for those, so that there can be homogeneous carbon credit markets, but then they can trade against each other seamlessly globally. I think we all know that that's the future that we'll find ourselves in. I wrote a white paper about how to create a global carbon credit market in early 2016. And some different startups popped up along the way based on that. And I was happy to, hear it and see it, but felt very strongly in that cycle, that kind of 2017 cycle, that like real world infrastructure and the crossover of tokenization wasn't quite ready. It appears now that we're entering into an era where things feel ready for that use case.
Yeah, I think that has been our experience. Like when we set up Power Ledger in 2016, and in 2017, there were like 25 companies that we saw at least that popped up in this field, and most of them disappeared. I think there's only us and one other left.
Yep.
And, there are various versions of thesis around this topic, but not really understanding that it was more of a marathon than a sprint, I think, in many cases. And, how to kind of develop products and test them in the market in readiness for the moment that I also think we're kind of entering into now as well. So, yeah, it's been interesting seeing that and obviously working in the field through that period where a lot of people wished and hoped that it would happen sooner.
Yeah.
But one of our major shareholders, he's invested, his name's Bill High, and he's invested in quite a lot of companies with longer thesis attached to it. And he said that he thinks with AI right now and the energy demand, the growth in demand, that this could be a catalyst for changing the way that energy is priced and delivered to the market in a similar way to like the Telecommunication Deregulation Act of 1996 that we saw in the US. That saw many ISPs set up and the way phone calls and data was priced and delivered change. So I think that we're getting closer to a time. It's a question of what will be the catalyst and where it will happen first. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah. So the primary stakeholder that you have to get over the line is the highly regulated distribution utilities, right? The kind of like inflection point sits at the distribution utilities having adoption, because in most markets, the regulated monopolies, they're inundated with compliance lawyers that have been holding this back for a long time. But now just the overwhelming demand is going to cause a sea change that fortunately is also coming with respect to regulation as well. And I think we're starting to see the first indicators of that in America, but that will spread sooner rather than later globally. And so I'm pretty excited about that overall, that we're finally seeing the sea change in the distribution utilities, which are the key ones. Transmission players and generators, they always would have signed up for it. Right?
Totally.
I was an ISP and a generator for a number of years. I was very excited about it. But I knew that I had spent enough time working with distribution utilities that I knew the reality of being inside of one of them, and that they would be the last domino to fall. But hopefully, I think we're at that time.
Interesting. But it sounds like you're tracking what's going on in the energy industry notionally, but in the work that you're doing now, is there any intersection with energy in any meaningful sense, or is it the new line of work has ended up being just new areas of focus?
Yeah. When I made the leap in 2015 full-time, I wanted that kind of clean cut. And frankly, the return profile of crypto so outstrips even the best like successes in energy that it just didn't make sense to put a lot of capital to work in energy. So today it's not a focus, but at the same time, it's something that I continue to follow really closely. I'm particularly excited about solar as just like, levelized cost of energy winner in the end, and just like the lowest cost of energy wins in the end, even with some of the innovations in like modular nuclear or fusion on the horizon or things like that. I feel like solar just becomes a really like nuts and bolts easy way to capture generation close enough to distribution that you immediately solve the transmission problem. And as long as you can get storage right, which I spent a lot of time in the 2000s, then I think that's a big part of the solution. And as we get below kind of 2 cents per kilowatt hour LCOE on solar, I think a lot of these technologies begin to converge.
Yeah, even with the total cost of energy, including storage, might be higher. You're saying that.
Yeah, if you can get generation down below 3 cents, and then say you have an effective extra cost, but it's only on like post leveling of, say, another 3 to 5 cents for energy storage, which we're further away from that than we are from 3 cents
Yeah,
solar
absolutely.
generation, right? So storage becomes really the technical bottleneck. The good thing is, like, the solution is there, right? Like, solid state batteries are scaling at enough of a pace that we will get there over time. Just have to be patient, and that's the pace of energy.
Yeah, indeed. And so when you decided to dive into Web3 in 2015, what were your initial projects and endeavors? Are they the ones you're working on now? Are they other things?
Yeah, in many ways, yes. So I started deploying capital specifically in the Ethereum ecosystem at that time. Made the first investment into what is now MakerDAO, also co-wrote that white paper. And really that was kind of the grandfather moment of DeFi, which is the primary focus today. And certainly of the like 6 use cases of crypto that have captured traction, I think DeFi, decentralized debt, is one of the most exciting ones. And so that remains very core to my passion. But then was writing other angel checks in the Ethereum ecosystem and met Olaf Carlson Wee a few weeks after he started Polychain Capital and came on as the first employee. And, you know, a lot of the projects that we underwrote at that time, creating the SAFT and then, you know, putting some of the first capital into different token projects was a really fun, credible moment in the space. And so a lot of those projects I'm still involved with today, and I'm still very proud shareholder of Polychain Capital, and the work that they do is great.
Amazing. What about the projects that you've invested in that have become most interesting kind of shapeshifters in the Web3 space? Could you tell us about some of the companies that you...
Yeah, so early or first money in the door, and kind of chronologically, Ethereum, MakerDAO, Polkadot, Filecoin, Tezos, Solana, Axie Infinity, Rari Capital, a number of others. Made approximately 200 investments over the course of now 12 years in the space. And it's really been interesting to see it all unfold and be as excited about many of the use cases as we were at that time. You know, as I mentioned, there's 6 use cases that have traction in crypto that are exciting. There's the non-sovereign store of value, which I think Bitcoin has kind of won on. There's stable coins, of which a little less than 2/3 of all stable coins sit on Ethereum. And there's decentralized capital formation. So it was ICOs in 2017 era. I think we'll see a comeback of ICOs and tokenized capital formation. We also had kind of the meme coin blip last year, although waning than that accrued to Solana, but still a lot happening there in Ethereum. There is decentralized debt, or DeFi. And then from there is digital provenance of digital art, and finally real world assets. And that real world assets thing is really the latest emerging use case to capture traction. There was a lot of hope around that in the 2018 era, but now we're finally seeing, you know, a path where all this stuff feels legal and feels like we can move forward with innovation without the weight of over-regulation or actually under-regulation and just like lack of clarity. So 5 of those 6 use cases are really dominated by Ethereum. And I find myself now, you know, celebrating Ethereum's 10th anniversary with a lot of renewed focus in the Ethereum ecosystem. Yeah.
That was actually going to be my next question around Ethereum. What's your view on Ethereum? Because many new projects are, as a default, going to Solana.
Mm-hmm.
And you obviously mentioned you invested in Solana, so you're obviously a believer in it in certain instances. I'm curious to know how you see that unfolding, particularly as like level 2s were touted as this kind of great solution to the lack of speed of Ethereum, but in solving that problem presented a whole host of new problems.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And we have not gotten the traction, especially if we look at DeFi. More than 3/4 of DeFi still exists on main chain.
Yes.
That, to the great surprise of us all, quite frankly. However, there are 2 data points that I cannot stop thinking about with respect to Ethereum. One is that when you go to deeply involved technical conferences or speak with people who are really pushing the technical boundaries of this space, most of it is kind of in reference back to Ethereum, whether it's in zero knowledge space or a whole host of other use cases. Most of the really smart devs continue to be focused on Ethereum. The other non-obvious use case that most people don't understand, but I've had a privileged purview into, is when you talk with top tier digital artists who are minting, provenance of their digital art on chain. And that's a really interesting use case because that cohort of people didn't have collectability for their art until the advent of NFTs. If you talk with a top tier digital artist and ask them, will they mint on any other chain besides Ethereum? The answer is resoundingly a strong no.
Interesting.
Yeah, very strong no. If you ask like a Rafik Abidal or a Beeple or Holly Herndon or a whole range of other artists to mint on any other chain, they wouldn't even consider it. That's a really important point because this is their life's work. They care very deeply about its longevity over all things. And when an artist thinks deeply about the longevity of their work that they're putting out into the world, they only choose Ethereum, which I find to be a very interesting, non-obvious, but very telling data point of Ethereum's importance to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying is this around art, Ethereum is very important. What they're effectively leveraging, though, is the stability of the network that's provided by many other projects that, it's not all being provided and won't all be provided by the art sector. I mean, if many other projects in other sectors were to form a different view, then equally or by extension, the artists may start to see the Ethereum ecosystem differently.
For sure. I mean, that could change. And, new chains could pop up, and I continue to be very open-minded about it. I've said for many years that we probably don't have our end state chain, right? Like the winner, so to speak, probably doesn't even exist yet. That may even still be the case today. But with all the data points in hand today, what we see when people are playing a really long game and want to be surrounded by technical sophistication and maturity, usually they're choosing Ethereum in 2025. And I don't, in this moment, see any other chains realistically threatening that. There are some interesting things saying like in value accrual across projects and ecosystems where, now we can be more unabashed about value accruing to token holders. Mm-hmm. And so chains getting traction with that, I think, is really interesting. But right now, it seems like it will be some kind of extension or, again, in reference to Ethereum in some way.
Yeah.
So that general ecosystem certainly is the most intellectually engaging for me right now.
Great. I mean, I hadn't heard that view and the rationale expressed before like that. So it's very interesting to get that perspective. You're obviously deeply involved in the art space. Could you tell us a little bit around what you're doing right now in the NFT space?
So I sort of stumbled into art very indirectly, where in 2019, I was running around the space sort of saying, hey guys, it's like sort of the same group of us trading the same tokens back and forth between each other since around 2013. We're not bringing in meaningful amounts of new energy and new cohorts of people into the space. And NFTs was a very interesting moment for me because you saw it solve a real problem for digital artists, right? Before NFTs, you couldn't really tell what the original work of digital art is or what the copy is. And so then, there's always this question of provenance. And because of that, it lacked collectability. And with the lack of collectability, it lacked, say, compelling price point to capture people's attention. Most famously, I think, before Beeple started selling NFTs for millions of dollars, the highest he ever got for an everyday was $110.
Wow.
Right. And so you see that like crucible moment of digital scarcity conveying collectability. And then with collectability, you get the establishment of value. And then obviously you get zeitgeist with that, for better or for worse. And so it brought in a new cohort of people. Like you went to NFT and digital art events, like, it wasn't the same old folks. It was a very different energy and vibe and something I was really excited about and remain so. So as things unfolded with One of One, we really kind of circled around and centered on a niche of helping digital artists take their rightful place in art canon. I took the signal from a wonderful friend and mentor just over here in Luzerne, Uli Sig, who really rewrote art canon to include a generation of Chinese artists that were completely forgotten before he started collecting them and had the vision. And so with his guidance, we kind of observed that digital artists today do not have the rightful place in art canon. That will change. And so one has worked with major museums doing exhibitions of our portfolio of artists, and they have been overwhelming, to say the least.
Hugely successful.
The Rafik Anadol Machine Hallucinations MoMA exhibition broke a range of MoMA's records, brought in almost 3 million people. It's extended 5 times. We were not prepared for that kind of response. But what it did is it woke museums up to the fact that this inspiring digital art is one of the solutions to bring people back to museums after COVID. And as a result, major museums around the world started getting excited very, very quickly and started moving at a pace that they'd never moved before, right? Which is kind of why I'm like optimistic about distribution utilities, is because like I've watched this old guard industry click and kind of like start to move at a pace that they never moved. Like the MoMA show, we got done from the first day through the door to it being installed was 8 months, right? That was like unheard of in art. Guggenheim, Bilbao, where Rafik has recently broken their attendance record, that was the turnaround on that was like 4 months. The Winds of Yawanok work was like, 3. We've had Human One on this global tour that has really turned into kind of its own adventure, where people and I get to go around to these different places. Right now it's at Mori in Japan, and we've started doing live performative updates for every chapter update of Human One. So it's been something that I could not have predicted, but I'm deeply grateful that museums have decided that, they want to hear what we have to say and they want to show our works. And so we're happy to oblige.
Amazing. So yeah, you kind of became them of your own success and changed the way the logistics happen within museums so they can get themselves organized to bring in art faster than ever before, recognizing they're going to get attendance like never seen before.
Yeah, it was one of these things where even very early on when certain major institutions would say, yeah, we can like plan for like 27, we would immediately cut the conversation very quickly. And we said, look, whatever you're going to plan for 2 years out, the only thing I can guarantee you is that it doesn't matter and it's not good. So we're not like, it's just not like reasonable. It's not even a good idea for you to work on that kind of timeline. And then really like the question in the back of my mind was always, well, if MoMA can get it done in 8 months, what's your excuse?
Yeah.
Right. And so that they set the standard as they do. And, and so it's much more a credit to them and their execution than anything we're doing.
Mm-hmm. How many pieces have you got in your collection?
So the entire collection is about 400, although there's sort of a range of things. There's kind of a dozen core artists that we spend most of our time with. These are very like involved projects. So there isn't kind of like infinite, time resources to spend with each artist. And art, like crypto, like many other collectible spaces, a lot of the value and attention accrues to the upper crust of the space. So, dealing with people on Rafik and Sam Spratt and Holly Herndon, like that is more than a full-time job on its own. And the focus has really centered around this museum quality digital art. Kind of in the recent years, the mantra has been fewer but better, kind of thing. And so our collecting activities has focused and centered.
Amazing.
I wouldn't mind just jumping in with one quick question, Ryan. I'm fascinated by the progression that is the definition of what art is, because, how is that battle between traditional art and, this new development in art and even valuing it?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a bit spoiled by the mentors and wonderful people that I have around me guiding my path in art. So we don't spend a lot of time or mind space on this question of like, is digital art or that type of thing? We kind of have this open-minded view of what an artist deems art is art. And then like in that category of art, if you want to compare and contrast against different categories in contemporary art, that's fine. But not that all things are art, but all things created by artists are. And so I don't myself see a lot of the debate of like, this, doesn't count, or the blocking of digital art as legitimate and arcane. I know it exists because that's why, we're on this mission. But maybe I'm not the person that people waste time in this argument with, because I just like don't waste time in that argument. It's like, by what standard would you deem something like Rafiq's machine hallucinations or Human One not an extraordinary work of contemporary art? In the case of Human One, people ask me sometimes like, what do you think of the purchase now 5 years in? And I usually respond by saying, tell me a work of contemporary art made this century that has had the museum tour and reception of Human One. Literally zero.
Unparalleled.
And so, I remain really happy with the work and the advantages that this new category affords. So if you're going to collect, say, traditional 20th century contemporary art, Warhols and Basquiat's and things like that, you have no relationship with the artist. You have this like really deep kind of market dynamic that also has capital influences that greatly eclipse your own ability as a collector. And in this category, I get to connect directly with the artists. Most of what I acquire is directly from the artists, and build this relationship. And because their art is evolving, also collaborate and, like offer inputs and things like that in a respectful manner. Obviously, the work remains the brainchild of the artist, but there's an open-mindedness to the relationship and collaboration that I would not choose, or I would not trade for traditional contemporary. In fact, I don't even understand how people like only collect dead artists from galleries. It's like you're missing the fun, man.
You have no art from dead artists in your house.
No.
As soon as they die, they get the art.
That's it. I mean, that is like a lot of people's thesis and strategy.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, there's a whole category of collectors who like collect like kind of artists in their 80s and 90s waiting for the death certificate to then commercialize.
Oh, yeah. The value goes up because there's no more art being created.
That's theory. It's like still just not something that I find intellectually compelling.
With art, you also work and manage funds, and you've got algorithms that optimize crypto. So two very different worlds. Are they similar in any way? We'd like to talk about your work with Dialectic and Vine Ventures, but do you see them as intimately linked in any way?
Very much so. So the art collection sits on top of the machine that is Dialectic. Dialectic, being this yielding machine, this compounding machine, affords different interesting use cases where you can experiment in what I think are actually very important intellectual experiments. And I'll explain why. So in one, we take debt against the portfolio, and then we put it into our high yield machine, and then it creates a yield. The spreads we look for are typically double digits. That's unthinkable in art lending world historically, but because you use the speed of crypto and crypto primitives, you're able to get much higher.
Collateralize them and get.
So you collateralize and it produces cash flow. And that's something that, again, with the generalized machine, compounding machine, you're allowed to do these important experiments. Why is this experiment important beyond just the self-sustaining collection, which is already great? It's important because institutions will likely have to start seeking new forms of sustainability over time. And certain institutions that have tens of billions of dollars worth of capital assets in the art that they hold will be able to seek an important yield that will likely cover a really substantial part of budget, and then take pressure off of either states that, no longer make overtures as much to the arts, or individual donors. And so this experiment in showing how an institutional art collection can create a cash flow, and that cash flow then can fund exhibition activities as well as further acquisitions of collecting activities, is sort of a demonstration project to a range of cultural institutions the world over that this is possible. You have to have the machine, but as long as you have a good yielding machine, you can do this. And I know that a lot of institutions are watching this very keenly play out. So we consider the experiment there very important. But Dialectic broadly is a yielding machine where we yield on Bitcoin, ETH, and US dollar, mostly in DeFi, but through a range of strategies. And we bring a very focused approach to risk management and institutionalization of DeFi. I've got a layer of insurance and self-insurance and a layer of automation that, to my knowledge, nobody else has. And certainly the strongest data set in DeFi. So we've been using, our decisions have been driven by machine learning since 2021. We didn't wait around for LLMs to be using machine learning in our everyday activities. And so that produces what we understand to be the best risk-adjusted yield in DeFi across those three assets. And the mantra is that compound interest is the strongest force in the universe. We know this is true in nature with the golden ratio. We know it's true in finance with compound returns. But Dialectic has also proven that it's true in relationships, in skill development, and in code base. The core team remains intact and highly motivated. Real trust has emerged over time. And the code continues to compound and people continue to compound on themselves, which is really, really gratifying as an entrepreneur.
And so what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that the NFT collection created and the initial capital that was deployed.
Oh, no.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't. Yeah,
we had the machine anyways. And the digital art collection was just this weekend side project that kind of popped up at 2020. We just sort of were doing it together, and it's taken on a life of its own. But the core, and in fact, that's kind of been the rub at times with one of one, is, the outside world's been really excited by one of one and the things that it does working with artists. But 95% of my time is focused on Dialectic, and there is a frustration where most people want to talk first and foremost about the art. And I'm kind of you guys realize we have a machine that makes money.
Oh, for sure. Just want to talk about the art.
Well, I think I might have asked you that on the train when I bumped into you. I said, oh, what would you like to be written on your gravestone that, you pioneered amazing things in the art space, or, you've got double-digit returns for, X amount of years. And you said, oh, the double-digit returns, way more important. I mean, I took it with the tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's some element of deep truth in that as well. But, people...
I don't deny.
No.
You've been out.
But it's kind of ironic that there's so much attention on the art space, but yet you want to focus your attention in the fund business.
I mean, the yielding activities are really interesting. And I was in a panel in San Francisco in 2016, and they asked myself and a few other asset allocators, including Richard Kribe from Numerai, what will the end state of capital allocators be? And across the four of us, we all repeated the exact same thing, which is that eventually we'll just hand over our capital to the machines that will just have far superior information and be able to execute in a superior fashion. And that will be the best compounding on your assets, such that we will laugh at the idea that we used to give money to a guy, and that guy would think up in his mind ideas of where to invest it. It's ridiculous that a singular or even group of minds will be the long-term solution for capital allocation. And so Dialectic has always just been trying to build a sliver of that end state machine. And the on-chain infrastructure that we've built with Dialectic and now will release to the world with MakerDAO is just incredibly exciting. The energy in our office is really high.
I want to go back to art.
Sure.
I guess again, just for a moment, actually to talk about some of the products that can emerge off the back of NFTs that could grow the space even more.
For sure.
And I think that has been what you've observed in terms of artists that were not able to monetize their art and are now, created a whole new asset class and addressable and obtainable market just from the NFTs. But there's a lot of talk about associated products, what does the NFT confer besides ownership of the art? For example, first in line of queues to attend exhibitions or, being given a particular status that allows you access to the artists, or I'm sure there's a whole range of other things.
Sure.
How would you characterize all of that, and how significant do you feel that it actually is?
Yeah. So NFTs just being sold as essentially a certificate of provenance of digital art, and that first sort of 2017 to 2021 cycle is one of dozens of use cases that are immediately addressable or made interesting with NFTs. Anything that is essentially non-fungible, so non-dividable effectively, will be an NFT. That includes real estate deeds and stock certificates and legal contracts and various other things that cannot be divided, including time-sensitive use cases, like, say, entry to a club or entry to an event or tiered entry into different things. And those are, I think, like continuing to evolve. They probably evolved slower in the last few years than I think we would have hoped for in the early 2020s. But there are a range of interesting startups using like some form of non-fungible token as part of their use case. In fact, one example for us is Machina. So Machina is our on-chain infrastructure for asset management, where Dialectic will offer its yielding funds on-chain and token incentivized. And the sort of leaderboard of LPs in Machina will also receive a reward of a Rafiq Anadol NFT.
Oh,
And so we're starting to see this like crossover of like the art, being earned rather than bought, or just like different games. I wish I could share with you, but in the next few months, we will also release a project to the world around a really important piece of contemporary art that we're very, very grateful that the artist came to us to be the steward of, that will, again, use NFTs in more of a community building fashion around this iconic work of art rather than just be the certificate of provenance. And so, again, what I see is a lot of experimentation in this area, and I remain very excited about all the different use cases beyond certificate of provenance.
And how big would you say that market is right now, and what do you foresee it becoming in the nearer term?
Yeah, I mean, it fluctuates quite wildly, and you would have to also estimate a bunch of things that haven't traded hands, but you could say that the total like capital value represented by NFTs is somewhere in the single digit billions, kind of like a 4 to 7 billion today. And that goes across all assets. There is certainly a 1000x from here. So $4 trillion within a decade will be secured by NFTs and not 4 billion. It's important to remember a specific use case in that the natural transaction medium for artificial intelligence will be blockchains. Blockchains will enable faster throughput of transactions led by AI than banks will ever allow. Like the banks will not even be over their own anxiety before the AI is just figured it out using blockchains. So as we have AI-driven capital allocators working with larger capital pools that have to be secured by debt and DeFi and so on and so forth, like real estate assets, once you're onboarding real estate, quickly get into the hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. And I think that's unquestionably where we're going.
And it sounds like you think that this is going to happen. It will disrupt the incumbent players as opposed to them adopting the technology and perhaps self-disrupting some of their existing ways of working.
I mean, it's difficult to predict, right? I think naturally it won't, like some incumbents will make the leap and some won't, right? Like, certain forward-thinking investment banks will and are getting serious about this now, where a range of like legacy retail commercial banks will probably be slow and reduced importance as a result, as we see like neobanks, get more aggressive with it as a use case. So it's not like it will disrupt, say, banking as a whole, but the complexion of banking will be very different. And this will be seen as a core technology, not some fringe thing that a bunch of cypherpunks are into. Same thing as like Bitcoin, right? If we maybe even take like the last 2 years of Bitcoin's kind of real adoption, now 16 years in, call it, and NFTs really started getting kind of traction in the late 2010s, around that same time frame, like post a decade, but before 2 decades, I think you see widespread adoption.
Yeah, mainstreaming we're starting to see emerge, in the kind of more well-known bits of crypto. I think what you're saying also is there's a lot of stuff happening that's gaining significance and traction that's not as well understood in the mainstream yet?
For sure. I mean, there continues to be a lot of experimentation that is still very early stage, I would say.
What are the things that you're most focused on for the remainder of this year, Ryan?
Our focus is Machina right now and launching Machina. So Machina is crucial infrastructure for capital allocators on chain, especially as they go cross chain. And DeFi is a really natural use case. So we'll offer the 3 dialectic yielding vehicles day one on Machina, along with some other operators that will offer some other things on Machina. But, as we see DeFi AI agents emerge, they must have guardrails. If DeFi AI doesn't have guardrails, it will rub more capital than has ever been rubbed in the history of the space. And so this infrastructure of Rails that incidentally was originally conceptualized by the CEO of Machina, Jenna Zeng, when she built Melonport, I think right here, in this building.
Oh, in CB Labs.
Yes. And no, maybe not CB Labs, but in 2014, 2015, Melonport was really one of the first projects in Ethereum. And I was really excited by Jenna was building as CTO. So Machina is really a coming home moment for her, where finally we have the need and the infrastructure to have this, this sort of operator environment for asset managers to be able to deploy capital more effectively, have access to more advanced data and more advanced tooling, but then also be able to give confidence to their investors, their LPs, that there are rules in place, there's insurance in place, there's, that kind of institutional capital on chain being the adults in the room. So I'm incredibly excited about Machina. It's been kind of a long time coming. I would say it's been the last 18 months of us building this out. But really, for people like the leader, Jenna, it's been more than a decade of thinking about this problem. And
Life's work.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the guardrails as well. What are the kinds of things that can happen and how can it all go wrong? And obviously, Marco, did you know that you called it car in Italian?
Oh,
That
really?
it's a car.
Well, so it's a play on a Portuguese word for machine.
Oh,
All right. And so it's this on-chain yielding machine, and everything in Dialectic kind of has this metaphor of machines and walking.
I think that's where the name originated from as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was intended to be, a machine or a vehicle in this case. But so today, we go and look at the code of every pool that we'll put capital into. And one of the things that creates red flags immediately that's high risk is updatable code, or everything just being controlled by a multi-sig that's effectively controlled by the same 3 people sitting in the same room, this type of thing. And so Machina will provide a range of infrastructure around these things so that yielding can be done more securely, effectively, and also that you can securely go cross-chain. And that's the really important thing, is today, most of the vaults that you're in are single chain vaults. And so when you can start stacking chain yields on top of each other using hyper diversification in a singular machine, that's really where you get the outlier returns. That's what we've been doing as a core business for now 5 years.
Arbitraging as well.
It opens up arbitrage and a whole bunch of other opportunities. All those spreads and opportunities amplify as you go cross chain, right? It's all fairly efficient within EVM. But then once you're willing and able to finally go cross chain, there's much more compelling spreads that you can capture. The problem there is that in today's environment, you just rely on the operator, the capital allocator, to be honest. And frankly, because we exist in these adversarial environments, often they're not. Often they'll make off with money in some way, shape, or form, especially in cross-chain environments. And so Machina solves that problem. Operators can go cross-chain, but they can't make off with your money just because they're on a new chain. And that's kind of a core infrastructure.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And what's your favorite song at the moment, Ryan?
Narina by, it sounds Brazilian, but it's not. It's by this DJ pair called Trinix. And it reminds me of when I was in the Amazon with Rafik visiting the Yawanawa tribe, and what was their Geneva Accord moment. This amazing event that came together that Rafik's art supported. that allowed 72 tribes from around the world to come together and really be led by what is the royal family of the forest, the Owanoa, in setting a new direction for how they protect their sacred forests and their practices. And it was just a really beautiful moment. And so it's a song that kind of reminds me of that moment, which was intensely emotional.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining
you
me
for
on the
having
podcast. It's a very interesting conversation. I learnt a lot of things I didn't know, and it was great to dive into some of the topics that you're very well known for as well, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
That's all for this episode of Unblock'd. Please check out the show notes for information on Power Ledger and other contact information. We welcome your comments and feedback, and please hit subscribe wherever you are listening. This podcast was produced by Podcasts Done For You. We look forward to your company next time on Unblock'd.